Hello, this video is a quick intro to SQL for data analysts. So this video might be good for anyone who wants to learn more about SQL. It doesn't necessarily have to be for data analysts, but commonly most people I find who want to learn SQL are trying to get into like some data field, or it could be a quick refresher anyways, but this could be very basic. I'm Michael. I've spent like the last 8 years working in data, and then I have a master's in data science and bachelor's degree in something else. And so I work with data pretty much all the time, and so I use SQL pretty much every day for hours a day. At this point in my life, I know it pretty well. So what is SQL? So SQL, also known as your structured query language, is basically just a way to access data from a database. When we say access data, we mean basically we're using SQL as the programming language to talk to the database to get the specific data we want from a database with certain filters or parameters. Basically, we're telling the database that we want to just get this specific type of data and nothing else. And now SQL usually talks just to SQL-based databases, also known as relational databases. And so relational databases are databases that store data in the form of tables. Tables with rows and columns. The way I like to think of it is relational databases are like Google Sheets files or Excel files, where basically you have all your rows, you have all your columns, and the value of the data is the cells that are mapped to from the rows and the columns. Here's an image of a Google Sheet, and here you can see all the rows and all the columns. And in this example, the data is anything that is written in the cell values of the Google Sheet file itself. In relational databases, they're pretty much just like big Google Sheet files that are stored in databases that are accessible via writing SQL code. At a high level, that's what SQL is. SQL is just a way for you to access specific data that you want from a SQL-based database. There are many ways that you can go about learning SQL. You can read books about SQL, you could take boot camps, you could go to school. I think for me, the best way I like to learn is literally just doing tutorials and projects. So YouTube has so many free resources, and then there's so many free websites too that you can use to learn SQL and make projects from free data that's available online. Kind of like make a data portfolio that you can really use when you get to interviews to show people and show, jobs that you know exactly what you're doing, and that will make you a much better candidate for getting the job. One website that you can kind of learn for free, and this is like very basics, this is like SQL 101, we're just getting into it, is called SQL Byte, SQLbyte.com. And let's hop right into it right now. Okay, we're back inside now, so let's hop right into it. It was a little too hot outside to film the full video, so we're inside in the AC. So here in SQL Bolt, this is like a free online SQL editor, so you don't need to download any server or any SQL server, or you don't need to download anything to get going. You can kind of just use this IDE to get going. And so that's what we're gonna start with right here. So here in the intro to SQL queries, we have an interactive table called movies. And in this, we have movies, titles of movies, directors of movies, the year the movie was released, and the total length and time. So the way that we see all this data from the get-go is we select star from movies. Let me break down each part of this here. So select means we want to get just the part of the specific data. So select means we want to get a bunch of data. So we're selecting data from, and now that key part is the from, where are we getting the data from? So we're getting the data from the table movies. So because you see up here that the table name is movies, we are selecting from the table movies. So we're selecting data from movies. Now, what are we selecting from movies? This is kind of the first like intricate detail about SQL. The star sign means all. So when you see star in SQL, that means you're selecting all from movies. So literally, the way you can interpret this is saying select all or select everything, all the data from the movies table. And that's exactly what this is doing. So we're selecting everything from movies. And so in movies, in the movies table, we see that there is 5 columns. There is ID, there is title, there is director, there is year, and then there is length in minutes. So this is the data that is in the movies table. It is 5 columns, 10 entries, 10 rows, and the data is containing different data that describes different facts or qualities or attributes about different movies. 10 movies to be exact. Now this is selecting everything. So we're looking at all of the data, but say we only really want to look at what titles are available. We say we only want to look at not all the data, but just the titles. So we would delete all, See, it says incomplete. So there's actually more data than just 10 rows. It says incomplete SQL query because we don't have anything selected. Now we need to select something from the movies table. So we're going to select title. Now, look at how this changed. Instead of showing everything that was there before, now it's only showing the names of the movies that are in the database or that are in the data table. So before we used to have director, year released, length in minutes, and ID. Now we only have the title of the movies. So the way you can specify exactly what data columns you want to select is you write the column name after the select statement. So we deleted the star and then we wrote select title. Now say you want more than one column selected, but you don't want everything selected. The way you can select multiple data columns together is using the comma. So now we're going to select title and ID. Boom. And look at that. We have title and ID. Now a key thing here, if you remember like 30 seconds ago when we had all selected, ID came before title because the way the data is stored in the database is ID is the first column, title with the second column. But you can specify the order of the columns you want to show by specifying after the select statement the columns in the order that you want. So we are making title come first by putting title first here and then after the comma ID. So if we were to download this data as a CSV file, inherently ID would come before title, but because we have specified the order that we want the data to render, we now have said that we want title to come first and ID second, and we did that by putting title variable ahead of the ID variable. So that's how we do that. That's how we can select just parts of data from a table if we don't want just one column or all of the data. So let's go back to all of the data. So now we have all of the data. You know, in practice and in reality, we don't usually want to look at all of the data. We want to look at just data that meets specific conditions. And the way that we can do that in SQL is using the where clause. So we can write after we have our select statement. So we keep select all from movies, and then we're gonna say where. And what where does, it introduces a conditional logic to the SQL statement. And so what we're doing here is we're saying we want to select all of the data from movies where a certain condition is met. And for example, let's say we want to select all from movies where the movie was released in 1995. So the way we would do that is we would say where year equals 1995. Boom. That returns Toy Story. So in this table, the only movie released in 1995 was Toy Story. And the way that we found that is we kept the initial statement, select all from movies, but we added the conditional logic where the year equals 1995. Now, you can do a lot with the where statement. The where statement is super powerful. Right now, we have it just set to where the exact year equals a certain value, but you can have that more than just equals. You can have it be greater than or less than. You can have a whole bunch of conditions in a where clause. So let's make it a little bit more advanced. Instead of just saying where the year equals 1995, let's say where the year is greater than 2000. We want recent movies. And look at that. This is the syntax for saying where greater than. If you remember back in it's pretty simple math. It's like the greater than equal sign. So we're looking for where the year is greater than or equal to 2000. And look, this renders all of these different movies. And you can see that Toy Story 1 is not here because the year for Toy Story 1 is 1995. And now we're only looking at movies released after 2000. So you can check out the manually inspect the data to make sure this is all correct. And yep, everything is released after 2000, but there's nothing before 2000. And now say that you wanted to look at movies that were released after 2000, but you don't want to look at movies that are that long. You want to look at a movie that's only under 100 minutes. And in the where clause, you can add multiple conditions. You can add multiple conditions, making your ability to filter the data a little bit more advanced and catered exactly to what you want. And so the way that you add an additional condition in the SQL statement is with an and statement. So you can use and or, but in this case, we're going to start just with an and statement. So we have select all for movies where the year is greater than or equal to 2000, and we want where the length in minutes is less than 100 minutes. And boom, that only returns one movie, Monsters, Inc. Interesting. So here, what we did is we showed that you can add multiple conditional statements to cater and filter the data to be super specific for what you want. So when you use a where clause, you can use multiple conditional statements is what I'm overall trying to show here, is that you're not limited to just filtering or having conditional logic applied to one column. You can have conditional logic applied in SQL to as many columns as you want, which is cool, but can also make it a little bit overwhelming too. Now, let's go back to where the year is greater than or equal to 2000 released. And you can see that this is ordered in the year ascending. So what I mean by ascending is inherently this data is stored, it looks like by year increasing, because you can see that ID equals 2001, 2003, and the year gets bigger as the further we go down in time. And you can actually reverse that instead. So say you didn't want to look at the data ordered by year ascending. Say you want to look at ordered by year descending. And what I mean by descending is you'd be looking at ordered by the newest movie on top, then the second newest movie, then the third newest movie downward, instead of where we have it ordered by ascending, where it's the oldest movies on top, the second oldest movie, and the third oldest movie. And the way you do that is you can add an order by year. Oh, spelled that wrong. DESC. Boom. And DESC stands for descending. The alternative is ASC, which stands for ascending. And you can see, because this is a live editor, as we change the columns, the data dynamically changes. So now we have it by DESC with Monsters University. That's the newest movie released in 2013. That is now one. And now the oldest movie in the list, Monsters, Inc., released in 2001, is at the bottom. Now, the cool thing is that the ID doesn't change. And the ID doesn't change because the ID is a unique key that represents all of the data for a specific line item. In SQL, we call this a primary key. And a primary key is just a unique identifier that represents all of the data uniquely per that given row. And so for here, the primary key for Monsters University, or the primary key is ID. And even though we changed the order, the ID value is not changing. In the future, we'll get into this in a bit, but you can use the primary key to map multiple tables together. You map tables together with a foreign key mapping to a primary key, but that's out of the scope for this lesson. You can just think of it as that's a way to join multiple tables together. But even though Monsters University is in the index position 1, the ID is mapped as part of the row itself and does not change. So overall, what I'm trying to show you is that even though we change the order of the data, the ID value does not change because the ID value represents all of the data that is specific to that row and is not affected by the order of the data. And so I would encourage you, if you want to continue the tutorial in SQL Bolt, and at the end of it, you'll have the fundamentals of SQL kind of understood then. You can go so deep, like I could talk about this for hours, and maybe I will make a deeper course going deep in exactly like hours long material going through SQL. I think that could be kind of interesting. But to get started, this is what SQL is made up of. It's made up of selecting data from a data table and then applying conditional logic to the data so that you're only getting the exact data that you want. And it's super powerful. With SQL, you can do so much and you can get good jobs. You can become a data analyst or a business analyst or a data scientist or a data engineer from learning the SQL skill set. Ton more there. I think I will make a more in-depth SQL video in the future. I'm just trying to get going, teaching, talking about data analytics, SQL, all this stuff. So a lot more to come. This may not have been the best video. This is just kind of Michael getting going, trying to teach data. And I'm sure I will get better at this over time. So I recommend finish the SQL Bolt tutorial. I'll leave that in the linked comments below. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. If you're just getting started with SQL, I hope you learned something. And I'm trying to explain it in a way that makes SQL seem a little bit more intuitive, like without getting super technical very fast. Because a lot of documentation I have found in the past gets super technically deep first and doesn't actually explain the concepts in a very understandable manner if you're coming from not a super technical skill set. Like, this is the way you learn. The way you go from not knowing something to becoming super technical is learning through intuitive explanations of things. And that's what I'm trying to do here with SQL. I think I might have messed up a little bit. Getting into the primary keys may have become a little bit too complex. But anyways, this is what SQL is in a nutshell. And with that, I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you in the next one.